Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for logging into Trade and Invest in the US via EB5 visa program. You will hear from Mr. Daniel Ryan, Managing Director of Atlantic American Partners. He joined Atlantic American Partners in 2018. Mr. Ryan oversees the firm's EB5 Investor Visa Private Equity Fund marketing endeavors for international markets, as well as, of course, the UK. We've enabled the questions feature throughout this panel discussion. Type in your questions. We will answer them end of our panel discussion. And we apologize in advance if we can't answer your question. As a member of the LS team or Atlantic and American team, we'll be in touch with you after the webinar to discuss your investment immigration matters. Mr. Ryan, would you kindly introduce yourself to our audience?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for your time. Thank you, Sam. My name is Daniel Ryan, and as Sam said, I am Managing Director of Atlantic American Partners. We're an international private equity and investment banking firm based in Tampa, Florida. We are here today to talk about the EB5 program that we've been working on for the last 10 years. We have helped 700 families in this program. We'll get into the details of the program itself, but essentially today's webinar is to give you an overview of why an EB5 would be attractive to you as a UK resident to consider, and we are here to address the overview, the benefits, the logistics, and how it works.
Thank you, Daniel. For the people that are new to EB5, what is an EB5 visa? Give us a bit of the history and the logistical involvement.
Yeah, you know, this is the EB5 visa is a program that has been actually in effect for 30 years. And for a lot of people, it's an unknown program, but essentially in simple terms, it's a job creation program that started back in 1990 by the first George Bush president to create jobs by bringing in foreign capital to invest in new development projects. So EB5 basically is a way to create jobs in the United States by bringing in foreign capital, which would be yourselves as a UK citizen. And the requirement is that each investor, their investment through a money manager such as ourselves creates 10 jobs. And in return for that, the applicant yourselves would receive the opportunity to receive a green card, which would allow you to live, work, go to school in America after the approvals are met. But at its core, the EB5 program is a returnable investment, number one. It's a job creation tool for America, number two. And it's an opportunity for people like yourselves in the UK to have dual citizenship down the road if you choose. You don't have to, but it offers you kind of a plan B. And it allows, if you're a business person, to expand business to the United States and not worry about having the ability to perform business on a permanent basis. So this is a permanent resident visa program versus some of the others that we'll talk about here in a minute, whereby eventually, if you choose, you could become a citizen of the US, returnable investment so that the investment amount can be returned, and you're able to live both in the United States and go back and forth to the UK at your leisure.
Thank you, Daniel. Of course, you've explained there's a lot of history in terms of EB5 visas. And we know there's a humongous history between the UK and the US in terms of investment and trade. And a lot of people are not aware that part of that investment could lead to an EB5 visa. In terms of what are the benefits for UK citizens to invest in EB5 visa?
Well, the primary benefit, again, is the green card. It's the reason 90% of the people invest with us is they have a desire to live, work, play, send their children to schools in America. Now, for a UK resident right now, it might be one of the benefits is it's a diversified approach to your investments. obviously, your country is going through some changes just like we are. And a lot of our investors around the world are applying for an EB-5 visa to diversify their risk, to give themselves a little bit of peace of mind that they have money invested in the United States, the ability to perhaps move and live to the United States. And one of the probably the most tangible benefits, lower taxes. Our tax rates are lower significantly than UK right now. And even with the Biden administration, they will still be significantly lower. And we'll get into the specifics of that in just a moment. But the benefit again is under the EB-5 program, the investment is returned. It's not like a fee. You're going to hear about these citizenship by investment where you buy a bond and you live somewhere and that money is non-refundable. This is a refundable investment. So that's one benefit. Two, you get the green card and it goes in phases, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And three, eventually, if you choose, if you want to, you can become a citizen of the US. And again, you can remain and apply for dual citizenship. So you can keep your UK passport and become a US citizen. So you can become a dual citizen. So there's several benefits to the EB-5 program that is available to you as a UK citizen.
Thank you, Daniel. So just to recap, you mentioned about the investment made in terms of the benefits as it's a return on investment on the back of making a successful application with Atlantic American partners, which is amazing. For our viewers, what makes Atlantic American partners unique for an EB-5 applicant?
Well, I think we all tend to think we're unique in our own ways. So by being a little bit modest and humble, we're a type of firm, we're relatively quietly unique, and we don't really talk about it much because we intentionally like being under the radar, but we have what's called the diversified approach to EB-5. And that is, we look at it similar to what you would refer to as a mutual fund. So as an EB-5 investor, you're not investing in just one project, and we'll get into the details. An EB-5 investment to create jobs under most programs, it's an indirect, what's called a TEA, targeted employment area, where it's a new commercial real estate development project. And it needs to create 10 jobs. On average, over the last 10 years, we've created 18 jobs per investor. We've got a very unique track record and strong track record. We have 100% approval of all of our clients that we work with. But getting back to the diversification, what we do is we take a fund. We just started a new fund. We call it Campus Life Fund 2, and it's starting with the first project will be a purpose-built student housing project near the University of Florida, which has 55,000 students. It's one of the largest universities in America. And it's about an hour and a half drive from Tampa, where our office is. So it's a nice project because we can literally go in the car and go visit it as it's being built. And let me also mention, and I'll get back to the diversification, we are not the developer. And a lot of folks, be careful when you research EB-5, you'll get notifications from companies. They are developers. They are the developer themselves and the EB-5 fundraising mechanism mixed. So their motivation is to make money for themselves as the developer, much more so than to protect your investment. Our motivation is to protect your investment, because if we are the money managers, we're sponsoring you, our credibility is on the line to make sure you get your money back. So the diversified approach is this. Within this latest fund I just mentioned, there will be probably 3 to 4 projects. The total amount of the fund will be $100 million. It could be less, but we've put in the documentation of $100 million. So this first project that we will close and start construction on very soon, it will take somewhere in the neighborhood of around 13.5 million in EB5 equity to be invested in the swamp. So that's essentially 15 clients. So it remains that we'll have probably 3 or 4 or 5 other projects that will blend into this fund. So you as an investor in EB5, not only are you applying underneath this unique first project, which has a projected job creation well in excess of 10, I think it's closer to about 29 per investor. That is how you get your green card approved. But from a financial standpoint, you become part owner as a limited partner in the fund. And that's what makes us unique. You'll actually be a limited partner in the entire fund, not just this first project, but the second, third, and fourth project. So all of our clients have clearly enjoyed that benefit, because what that means is when the project sells, we share the capital gains with our EB5 clients. And that's what makes us extremely unique in the marketplace.
Thank you, Daniel. I guess you really work for the investor, and that's what's really important for the audience to understand. You're really helping the investor to make sure they put together a successful application, their money is safe, and you're actually making sure that investment is into a good project, a good, and I'm sure you're going to explain to us what this project, is about. However, Daniel, we're in this global pandemic now, and everyone's been impacted in terms of finances and resource. But you mentioned it a bit earlier that there's going to be huge taxations potentially coming into the UK, and a lot of wealthy top earners are going to be really hit hardest in terms of the taxation. How has this COVID pandemic impacted the EB5 program, and especially some of the projects that you've selected?
Great question, Sam, and I'm glad you brought that up. So obviously, COVID has hit everything everywhere around the world, globally. We're very fortunate, and this goes back to the benefit of diversification. And there's a lot of companies marketing all over the world. An EB5, one hotel, for example, in New York City, they might have one asset and they'll have 100 investors in one hotel. Well, I wouldn't want to be that investor in a hotel right now, because hotels, even the most successful hotels in New York City, the occupancy rates are about 20%. And they are not cash flowing. They are not making money. They're failing. And so many of those projects, you're going to see some problems. So the pandemic has impacted probably hotels more than anything. So we are on our new fund for investors that we're talking to today. We will have we plan to have no hotels in this next fund, simply to avoid that issue, because we see that hotels are going to be, it's going to be a challenge over the next several years for them to stabilize. We've chosen student housing because even in this pandemic, we have 4 student housing projects, and most of these universities, even if they've gone online, virtual, a lot of the students still want to live on or near campus. They still want to be involved in activities. Some of them have stayed home, but we found that our newer student housing projects are doing okay and doing quite well. Actually, they've filled up pretty quickly because most youngsters want to get away from their parents. It's part of the educational experience. It's not just the studying, it's the socializing part. So the point I'm driving at is we are trying to realize the impact of COVID. We look at this new fund. It begun construction. It'll have a 24-month construction cycle. So by the time it's built and ready for occupancy, we hope COVID has been at least managed through the vaccine process.
Thank you. I totally agree with you, Daniel. And thank you very much for being transparent, because a lot of people tend to opt in for these wonderful brochures, wonderful hotel locations. Student housing seems to be very secure, and there's always going to be investment in terms of education and the future of education. So that I applaud you for that.
Yeah.
In terms of, we know there's a number of UK nationals that apply for E2 visas. Can you kindly describe the difference between EB5, a permanent resident visa, versus the E2 on a temporary employment visa?
Yeah, and that's a really good question we need to talk about, because E2 is getting a lot of attention these days, and I want to clarify, we do not do E2s because they're a completely different type of visa. So let me explain. An E2 is a temporary visa. It doesn't allow you to become a permanent resident or a citizen eventually. So an E2 is really just a temporary way. If you want to invest directly in a franchise, for example, McDonald's or some kind of a restaurant chain. I don't want to speak too much about the E2 because we don't do it, but it's temporary. You get a 2-year visa, you keep renewing a 2-year visa, and you're not 100% guaranteed it's going to renew. You have to show profitability. And if you invest in something that doesn't make money, your investment could be at risk and you could lose your visa. So that's one of the reasons why we don't do E2s. They sound attractive because they're quick to process. People can get over here pretty quick, get kids in school. It sounds easy and simple, but the reality is it's not always that easy and simple. And many times people are very frustrated because, the minimum amount, there's going to be some changes with this new administration. But right now, to do an E2, you have to have a minimum of $100,000 to $200,000 invested in either an existing company or a to-be formed company, and you have to be the majority owner. But there's a lot of legalities, there's a lot of logistics, it's complicated. So I just say, be careful. It's not as simple as a lot of people market. And realize if you put in, let's say 200,000, you're not going to be able to take the earnings of that E2 investment and then put it into an EB5. That by law, they don't allow you to do that. They want you to reinvest it into the company. So whereas EB5, the intention is for you to take the amount which is returned back to you. Keep that in mind. It's a returnable investment with the intention of your desire to live and work in the States. As soon as we received an approval from a client in South Africa recently, after 10 months of submission, they're now living in the United States. So I'm not implying that would happen. USCIS has slowed down because of COVID. So, but we are advised by USCIS that it's likely that an applicant from the UK would be approved, subject to all the conditions within a 24-month period. So within 2 years, you could be living in the United States under a, quote, temporary green card, which would then lead to a permanent green card a couple of years thereafter. And thereafter, you have the ability to, A, get your money returned, which is obviously your motivation. B, you have a permanent green card, which allows you to stay permanently for up to 10 years and apply for US citizenship. And again, you can do dual citizenship. Whereas an E2, it's a temporary 2-year continually renewable visa that could easily stop being renewed at some point, and you could lose your investment because the business fails.
Thank you, Daniel. And I know you touched briefly about USCIS. I think it's important for our audience to know, you've gone through a number of rigorous to get your projects approved by USCIS. So it's a government recognized in a project. It's not
right.
a company that's been set up. So, I know it can take many years and there's a lot of work that gets into getting that approved. So in terms of the projects that you have, these are USCIS approved. Next question. I guess it's on a number of people's agenda because we're seeing all this support potentially from governments in various industries. But eventually we're going to have to pay that money back. And this comes down to personal taxations.
Yeah.
You touched briefly about, lower taxations in the US. What will the personal income tax rates be in the US after the change in administration?
Yeah.
will Florida remain a non-taxable personal income tax state?
Yeah. Well, so let me start with the good news. I live in Florida for a variety of reasons. And Florida is one of the few states in America, I believe there's 10 or 12, that do not have a personal income tax. It's unique. Most states do. So from the beginning, just to answer your question directly, the Biden administration will not be changing any of the state tax rates because that's a state issue. So Florida, there will be zero tax rate for personal income. Regarding the federal income tax rate, right now, and this is what a lot of people really need to pay attention to, because folks out there that we're talking to, obviously high net worth individuals. So here's the bottom line. Anything over income over 400,000 US dollars will be taxed under the new Biden administration at 39.6%, over 400,000. Now below 400,000, it will be between 24% and 32%. So that's important for you to understand. And I just did some research. I understand above 150,000 pounds, you're currently taxed at 45%. So, and I'm guessing it's going to go higher. It's probably a fairly good guess. So what I'm saying is with Biden, even with all of the investments that we're talking about, from reinvigorating the American economy, our personal income taxes on a federal basis will be less 39.6%, which is significantly less than your current 45% interest interest rate or percentage of tax on personal income. So, it's a significant difference, and that a lot of, and by the way, just as a side note, we as a company, Atlantic America is part of a larger group called CEA Worldwide, and we have an office in London right now. We've had it for the last 15 years. It's an international investment banking firm. And so one of the reasons why I'm talking with Sam and we're entering into UK to introduce our product and our company is I've traveled to London and Oxford and Birmingham several times over the last few years just to get the feel of the citizens. And with the issue, I don't want to concentrate too much on Brexit, but obviously, your country is going through a lot of adjustments, and there's going to be a lot of changes. And a lot of people that I ran into and our folks at our CEA Worldwide London office run into, they're all talking, what are some alternative investment options outside of the UK that will give them a little more diversified approach and a little more safety. And that's why we're now going to market into UK our EB-5 program, because we've already got probably a list of 20 people, high net worth people from London specifically, that just by income tax alone, they're gonna save some money, and they want to expand their businesses to the US. So it's a great way to invest money, expand their business, in general, lower their tax rate from the money that they're going to make. And it seems to be there's a lot of folks, and I don't want to overstate it, but there seems to be a lot of people that I spoke to that feel that now is a good time to have kind of a plan B option.
I'm hoping, Daniel, our audience are calculating how much money or savings they will make on the back of this relocation in terms of the numbers that you've given. As you said, we are taxed, and it's quite a high tax, and there's a lot of taxations that are paid. And of course, you mentioned in terms of done a little comparison, and that's a lot of savings.
Yeah,
a lot of savings.
Especially folks out there that we're talking to. When you look at you're looking at a significant amount. 6-7% of millions of dollars is a lot of money. So it is an advantage. And again, one of the reasons that I live personally in Florida I'm not sure exactly how it works in UK, but we have 51 states, and each state has their own tax rate. So we don't pay any state tax, whereas like New York State, if somebody wants to move to New York or consider New York, make sure you look at the tax rate of the personal income tax rate before you choose a state to consider to locate in, because it can add up quickly, and it'll make a difference at the end of the year.
And you touched briefly about the Biden administration. In terms of the new administration, how do you think or view, are they going to view the immigration in general in the US? And what kind of support are they going to provide for EB5 investors?
Well, this is really part of the good news. Biden in general and his administration have already made contact with the USCIS management team, and they're conveying it to regional centers like ourselves that first of all, they fully support the EB5 program. They plan to look into ways to make it even more attractive, which is very encouraging. And I don't want to provide false hope, but there is even discussion about expanding it to increase the number of visas. So right now there's 10,000 visas per year under this program. And part of the problem is when a family applies for an EB5, let's say you have 3 children and you and your wife have 3 children. So that's 5 visas. It's not, one application is not 1 visa, it's 5 visas. So 10,000 visas fill up fairly quickly. And, we've brought, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, just in the last, I think, and I'm trying to refresh my memory. I think over the last 10 years, through EB5, it has created in excess of $50 billion in GDP. So this is not just a cute program that, is kind of an offshoot. It's a serious program with serious economic implications. And the Biden administration, I think, is showing signs that they want to make it even better and make it more attractive. So we feel very, very confident that that it's going to not only be supported, but some more newer and adjusted items will be added to make it more attractive.
Thank you, Daniel. And you mentioned that you live in Florida. Why does Atlantic American Partners invest mostly in Florida? Is that because of Daniel Ryan? Is that because the Brits tend to choose Florida as a destination? And I know you also choose southern eastern parts of the US. Yeah. Tell us, in terms of, has COVID changed your investment strategy in any way?
Yeah. Well, let me start by saying we certainly don't invest in any project because of me. That's the last thing that we would look at. I'm just one part of a small part of a great group of people. Our corporate office is in Tampa, Florida. So our senior management team is here. However, we cover, the entire world basically. But here's the reason why we like to invest in Florida is really simply, it's just like anything. You want to invest in your own backyard. You want to be able to get in a car and drive and see what's going on. In Florida, it's one of the strongest economic states in the US. It's growing. Even with COVID, we are still economically doing better than probably 80% of the states in the country, because we have a pretty diversified economy. Even with COVID, everybody still wants to come to this warm climate of Florida. It's a very business-friendly environment. There's a tremendous amount of growth. Tampa is one of the fastest growing cities in America where we're located. And a lot of it is, it's a diversified job base. There's a lot of opportunities. There's good schools. Our public schools and our public universities, like the University of Florida that I mentioned earlier, is rated as one of the best public universities in the United States. So, the reason we purposely select Florida for our investments is because we want to invest where we know best. We've been involved in this market for 50 years or so as a company, so it gives us the ability to keep a close eye. And then occasionally we'll look at Atlanta, for example. We have a couple of projects in Atlanta, which is an hour flight or a 9-hour drive. We've also invested in the Dallas and Houston areas. So, you know, we consider ourselves kind of like, we concentrate on Florida, 80% of our projects, but we do some outside of Florida where they make sense, where they're really strong projects with good sponsors. And many times it's with a group that we've already done projects with. They ask us to join them when they go to Houston, for example. And so we've already established the relationship, and those projects have worked out quite well.
Excellent. Obviously, with this new government, everyone's concerned if there's going to be some changes on the EB-5 policy. There's been some slight changes before in the past. You know, what changes do you envisage in terms of with the new president?
Like I said, most of the changes occurred prior. It was, you know, during the Trump administration, and let's just be candid, it's been a tumultuous 4 years with this gentleman. And I don't want to be political, but let's be transparent. You know, his position on immigration was pretty erratic and offensive. And I'm just speaking candidly that, you know, from our standpoint, he didn't help our program at all. You know, I would travel around the world, and the first thing people would ask is, you know, how does he feel about immigration in general? And he comes across as he wants nobody, no matter what. And the truth of the matter is, he actually supported EB-5, but because he was so boisterous in his objections to every other form of immigration, nobody ever heard that part of the story. But with regard to the Biden administration, we see the big changes that were made back November in 2019 was the EB-5 program that we work on all the time increased. It's called the TEA indirect program, where the amount increased from 500,000 to 900,000. That was a huge change back November 2019. And rightly so, it needed to be adjusted because it hadn't been changed in 28 years. So if you just account for inflation, the initial $500,000 amount, you know, over time, it should have been increased to some degree. And so the point, to answer your question, do we see any major policy changes going forward? The answer is no, because the major policy change is already made with the amount increased. What we do forecast is some more flexible terms and expansion of the program for more visas, and possibly some more flexible structures to how the investments can be sourced. And that's something that, in general, we look at the Biden administration very favorably under this program because he's pro-immigration. You know, so in general, people are around the world. When I am meeting with folks, it's going to be refreshing to talk to somebody that's going to ask me instead, you know, they're going to say, boy, I sure like your new president's approach to immigration versus what is the problem with immigration. And so it's going to be refreshing moving forward. And I see nothing but good policy. If any kind of change, it'll be positive policy changes.
I completely agree. I think if there's more visa allocation, that would really help the situation. As we know, there's a limited amount of visa allocations per year. Great. Okay, so as a UK citizen, people on this webinar are probably going to Google EB-5, Atlantic American Partners. Hopefully they've done their research. And, you know, our job is to make sure they get the right and the correct information. Because, you know, a lot of information can be very misleading. We want to make sure they get the right content. As a UK citizen, as an investor, if I was doing EB-5, why should we or I do it through Atlantic American Partners?
That's the question of the day. And I'm very glad you're asking that question. Why would you, or why would I, let's say if I was a UK citizen, why would I? Well, the first thing I would look at is credibility and track record. You know, are these people for real? have they successfully done this? How many people have they successfully helped? And have they had any lawsuits or any problems? And so folks out there that are listening to this webinar, please do research our company. It's www.atlanticamericanpartners.com, which is part of www.ceaworldwide.com. And we have an office under the CEA name in London. So you can do your research and you can see we are for real. We've done 35 projects over 10 years successfully. We have 100% approvals of all clients that have gone through the process. There's very few companies that we compete with that can say that. And I, as an investor, I don't want to put all my money, I don't want to invest in an EB5 and it's going to go to a hotel, for example. And in COVID, that would be the least attractive investment right now would be a hotel. So I would say, no, thank you. I'll wait for the next project that seems to be more reasonable. And that's why under Atlantic American Partners, with the diversified approach, more than likely this fund's going to have 3 or 4 student housing, and we might mix it in with a high-rise multifamily, as you call them, flat rental property, which are pretty stable in certain parts of the U.S. And we're also looking at suburban. You know, there's also people with COVID now are looking at more space. They're working from home. So there's new developments that we're looking into, mixed use developments in the suburban outlying areas that we might invest in that have a component of housing, maybe a little bit of healthcare, you know, a mixed use development. So those are the type of investments we would be looking at. And so if I was you, Sam, or if I was one of our viewers, the reason I would look at Atlantic American Partners is really track record and credibility. And humbly speaking, I think we have both.
Thank you, Daniel. Just tell us a bit about Florida, because I know that's a wonderful destination for a number of the Brits, and you personally live in Florida, and you have projects in Florida. How is it in terms of how to live and work in Florida? Just give us a bit of an outline.
Okay, that's a fun question to answer because, you know, obviously I wouldn't live here if I didn't want to live here. I've been blessed to live in several parts of the world. I think I mentioned I lived 10 years in Africa. So I actually worked for this company, Atlantic American Partners, prior to moving to Africa and living and starting a management consulting firm for 10 years, and came back 3 years ago on purpose because Florida it's dynamic, it's growing. There's a variety of lifestyles. If you like city life, you've got Tampa is an attractive city. I have a condominium flat overlooking the Gulf of Mexico, and I can be at my office in 10 minutes, and that includes parking my car and walking to my office. So there are cities in Florida that have the ability to live and work and feel part of the community that are relatively reasonably priced compared to like New York City, San Francisco. You know, the condominium that project that we live in, for example, in Florida, the price ranges are in the $300,000 to $700,000 range. In San Francisco, up until recently, those would be like 1.5 million to 2.5 million US dollars. So Florida is attractive because cost of living is relatively low. You know, year-long warm weather. If you like warm weather, you can't beat it. And I will, on the flip side, let me be honest, it gets very hot in August and September. And those are the months you might want to come back to London and cool down a little bit, although sometimes you have warm weather too. But, you know, Florida's just a great mix of There's a lot of young people coming here because of jobs created. So you have retirees that tend to locate in certain parts of the state, and the younger crowd seems to locate like cities like Tampa, Miami, Jacksonville, parts of Orlando. So for viewers out there, you know, quality of life, if you love to boat, if you love water sports, if you love to golf, some of the greatest golf courses. I'm a golfer, and you know, I could spend, you know, one day a year visiting new golf courses and still probably not see them all in several years. So it's just a very enjoyable place to live. And finally, probably from a financial standpoint, since I'm in the finance industry, the lack of a state, it's like frosting on the cake.
Thank you so much, Daniel. You sound like a travel brochure and a great promotion for Florida. Thank you. So just to recap, obviously you've talked about EB5 visa, you've talked about some of the taxations, you talked about some of the strategies Atlantic American have undertaken in terms of COVID-19. Is there any other comments that you'd like to make to our audience?
Yeah, I think what I would like to state really is, you know, I think COVID has given us an opportunity to kind of evaluate our lives and look at what our plans are for the future. And, you know, from a standpoint of clients that are, you know, concerned about the future, concerned about taxes going up in the UK, I just think that this is a very good time to consider an EB5 because, again, it's a returnable investment. And I think the way I look at it, you're basically kind of putting money into an account. We're your account manager. And in 2 years, you get to move to the States, bring your family and start living here. 3 or 4 years thereafter, you get a permanent green card, and then you can stay for up to 10 years if you choose. At that point, when you get the permanent green card and the assets that we have built for you, we've sold them. You're not only going to get your money back, but you'll get a portion of the capital appreciation. And then you can make a decision, you know, a few years later, it gives you an option to apply for citizenship. And so, you know, you can, if you choose, most of our clients do because, you know, it's a simple process. And if you've been approved for an EB5 and you've lived, you know, a high quality life without any, you know, problems, your approval of getting citizenship is very likely. So there's a lot of benefits to being a dual citizen. You can go back and forth between the two countries easily. And a lot of our clients that we've talked to own businesses in the UK, and this is a great way to expand their business potential and have basically the ability to live in both countries for whatever time of the year they choose and have the benefit of not having to worry about economic and taxation issues that might arise as things change. Sam, now would be a good time to have the viewers see our video that shows our EB5 visa program and highlights some of our projects throughout Florida and the Southeast.
Thank you, Daniel, again. We have a number of questions that are popping up. Let's just select a few, and if you can kindly answer them. Hello.
Hello, Sam.
Hi. Great. Gar, would you? Okay, great. Okay, so
I'm on. I've been answering questions, Sam.
okay. So we have a question from, which is a great question to have, how to start the process. Perhaps Gar or Daniel would like to answer that question.
Yeah, go ahead. I think that after this call, the best way to do it is to have a conversation with Dan, and Dan's email address is dryan, RYAN, at AtlanticAmericanPartners.com, and you can do a private Zoom call, and Dan can kind of talk you through the various steps. We also have some written kind of a step-by-step guide as to how that process works, and Dan can send out sort of a step-by-step guide to the EB-5 visa.
Excellent. Well, we have a few people asking a few questions from Facebook, so apologies for the delay in the questions that are coming through. We have a question. If my application is denied, is our money refunded? Perhaps Gar, Daniel would like to answer that question.
Gar, go ahead and explain the details of that, if you would.
So the way it works is if somebody is denied, and if it's, in our case, we're very conservative. We've been doing this a long time. We know what USCIS wants. We've never had a project rejected in our 10-year history. So if somebody gets denied, it's probably going to be related to a source of funds issue. USCIS doesn't like the source of funds. Then they become a denied investor. And if we are, so let's say their money's gone into the construction of a student housing project at University of Florida. If that project is still under construction, because we meet, let me take a step back, Sam, and just talk a little bit about how the job creation works. Because the goal of the EB-5 program is to create jobs. And as Dan mentioned, it's 10 jobs per investor, and each investment's $900,000. The job creation is met by an econometric model that USCIS gives us to use. The model has two inputs, and the output is a job creation number. The first input is a construction expenditure. So for every $1 million of construction expenditure, you get about 10 jobs, plus or minus, depending on the location of the project. The second input is the revenue of the asset once it's placed into service. Multifamily and student housing, as you can imagine, there's just not a lot of employees around a multifamily. So for every $1 million of revenue, you get about 7 or 8 jobs. For a hotel, it's about 14 or 15. And for senior living, it's about 17 to 18. Our approach, again, our goal is to make sure everybody gets a green card, and we want to take the risk out of the process. So we meet the job creation requirement just from the construction expenditure. So we want to try to get, when a project comes into our underwriting team, the first thing we'll do is find the location. We'll get the job number, and then we'll size our investment so that we get about 12 or 13 jobs just for the construction expenditure. Then the investor files an application. The money goes to call it a student housing project at University of Florida, and it starts construction. Now you get 18 months into it, and the investor gets denied because of the source of funds. Well, for us, we've got a pretty good flow of investors. So the next investor that comes over will drop their money down into that project. And then that 900,000, we'll send it back up the next day. And then we'll send the new investors, we'll basically replace the denied investor with a new investor. Once the construction is complete, then the job creation benefit for a new investor is pretty well gone. So after a couple of years, if an investor gets denied, it's hard to find a replacement investor. So in that case, there's two different things we can do. Number one, we generally are sitting on about $15 million of cash, plus or minus 5 million at any one point in time, that we use to bridge our investors, usually on the front end for a new project. But we could we can use that bridge money to drop down and use that to redeem an investor. Or conversely, the investment is earning about 4% a year. So if worst case scenario, we didn't have any bridge money and the construction was already complete, then that investor, the denied investor, is going to have to wait until the projects liquidate in the fund. So if you get denied at year 3 because you've had an RFE and you're fighting immigration, and after year 3 you give up and you're denied, well, then it's going to take probably another year or two for the projects to liquidate and return the capital. And but during that whole period of time, the investor is still earning 4%, approximately per year.
Thank you, Gar. During the presentation, we noticed, obviously, on average, the jobs creations that you've done. So that is very important in terms of EB5. And thank you very much for explaining, obviously, the denials. And generally, denials are actually up to the investor. And also, they work very closely with their immigration attorney. And in the UK, we're very familiar with having full communication with our immigration attorney to make sure the right documents are provided, because it's very much based on the documentations. And over here, we're very used to the scrutinies that take place in terms of documentations. So it's very much about your source of funds. We have a question we have on taxations. I know we briefly talked about taxations. Under the new administration, what's happening in the UK. We're expecting huge tax hikes. Would you like to, Daniel, just briefly touch a bit, because a bit more on the taxation, please?
Could I take that one, Sam?
Yes,
yeah, go ahead, Gar.
Yeah. So in the U.S., any tax increase has to be done legislatively, and so it requires new legislation to pass the House of Representatives and the Senate before it could go to President Biden's desk for signature.
Mm-hmm.
In the U.S., to pass legislation, in the Senate, we still have a thing called the filibuster for now. And so you need 60 votes in the Senate to pass legislation. And right now there are 50 Republicans, there are 48 Democrats and 2 independents that tend to caucus with the Democrats. To get legislation done, it's got to be fairly bipartisan. So, and in the U.S. House of Representatives, the Democrats have a very, very narrow majority. And a lot of those members of Congress you have Democrats that are in Republican-leaning districts. So they've got to be very careful about passing legislation. My personal view is nothing's going to get done. And that's why the stock market has continued to stay fairly buoyant. Right now, marginal tax rate for corporations is 21%. And, President Biden, in his tax plan that he campaigned on, said he wanted to take that to 28%. And as Dan mentioned, he wants to take personal income top marginal rate up to 39.5%. I don't see that there's any way he's going to get that done legislatively, because the margins are just too thin in Congress. So, and if you were going to take the marginal tax rate on U.S. corporations from 21 to 28%, if the stock market believed that would actually happen, you would have seen the stock market fall significantly. And we're still setting record levels. And so I think the stock market has priced in that very little is going to happen from a tax policy perspective. Again, Sam, it's all my personal opinion. So,
No, I think ours making some very good points, and that is what I referenced in our discussion was what is being proposed by the Biden administration. I just wanted to give people a feel for what could potentially happen. But Gar's right. It's likely that that's gonna be a negotiated item, and it could very well be that takes some time, and maybe it does not get approved at that higher rate. It could be that it remains where it is for some time, which even is more beneficial to a UK resident because it's even lower than what I had mentioned. I wanted to give our viewers kind of like a reality check of what it could be. And even if what it could be is significantly lower than what you're currently experiencing before whatever's going to happen down the road.
I know a number of attendees have been typing in questions, and of course, Gar and Daniel, you've kindly been answering them, but I feel it's important that some of the viewers are aware of some of the current situation. Over in the UK, of course, we get free healthcare in terms of NHS, not necessarily the best healthcare, and the people that are on a high tax bracket end up paying for private healthcare, and so they're kind of paying twice. So what would be the current situation for British nationals if they do operate for the EB5 in terms of their private healthcare? Do they have to pay independently? How would that operate?
I'll answer that. I mean, after they moved to the U.S. and there are, after they receive their temporary green card, let's say in 24 months, and they're living here, we do not have free healthcare. So, all of us, individuals, we buy either through the companies that we work for or individually. We do have, I'm sure you've heard of the term Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. There is a program for lower income folks, but it is an expense that we all just budget for health insurance.
Great. So we have another question. In terms of your student housing project, I know there's a restrictions on foreign students coming in terms of a number of countries because of COVID. How is that having an impact on your current project?
Yeah, let me take that one because I'm typing the answer to it. And so it'll be easier for me to talk instead of type.
Yeah.
So we have 9, in the last 2 years, we've invested in 9 ground up student housing projects, and we've invested about $125 million of equity capital. Of those 9, 3 were open for the fall of 2020. And of those 3, one is at Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta. And we're actually cash flow positive. We're not 100% leased up because they are 100% online at Morehouse. But interestingly enough, in the U.S., kids got sent home basically, in March to finish out their semester, and a lot of kids were also online in the fall. After college kids being home for call it 6 months, they want to get away from their parents. I have 6 children, 2 of which are in college right now, and they were driving me crazy. So they want to get back. So even if they're online, they still want to be back in the university setting. They want to be with their friends. So student housing has held up better than we would have, I think, initially thought. So we're cash flow positive at Morehouse School of Medicine. We had a COVID, I'll call it kind of a COVID-related construction delay at a project in North Carolina. It opened for the spring semester, so students were moving in about 2 weeks ago, and it's in good shape and covering debt service. And then we have another project that's open in Daytona at Embry-Riddle University, and that's it's not. Last year it was 100% occupied. This year it's about 87% occupied, but still generating positive cash flow. The rest of our projects, the other 6 student housing projects we have, are expected to come online for the fall of 2021 school year. We have one that's coming online for spring of 2022, and then we have fall of 2022. At that point in time, it's anticipated that all of the universities and colleges in the United States will be 100% back open to live, classroom learning and not be virtual anymore. So, our student housing has has survived the pandemic pretty well. And in terms of being able to come back into the US, the executive order was that if you're a foreign student and you were not in the US, you were not allowed back into the US if you were 100% online. So the thought was, hey, if you're not having live classes, don't do the international travel, just do it online from your home country. However, that does not apply if you were enrolled in classes that were in person. So if you had, one in-person class 2 days a week, then that did not apply. However, the travel ban from certain countries still does apply, and that would supersede the student requirement. Now, one thing that has happened, the CDC came out about a week and a half ago with a new guideline saying that anybody coming to the US from out of the country would have to be able to have a negative COVID-19 test within 72 hours of coming to the US. That restriction is it's up to the airlines to enforce that. The thought, I think, is once that procedure starts to kind of take hold, there's some discussion, and Dan may have mentioned it earlier. I was distracted typing answers to questions, but I think the thought is that once that procedure kicks in and people get used to it, that'll probably be the new standard. And I think the travel ban will be lifted as long as you can provide a negative COVID-19 test.
Thank you, Gar. Can you explain a bit more in terms of your track record in the number of applications you've had? Because I've seen, you've highlighted, I think it's important for our audience to know that, the numbers Atlantic American have processed in terms of EB-5 investor applications.
Yeah, Dan, I'll let you take that unless you want me to.
Oh, go ahead, Gar. You can give the history.
So we got into this, Sam, back in 2008. We're the largest fund manager on the west coast of Florida, and so we were approached to put together a fund for EB-5. We had not heard of EB-5 at that point in time, but we thought that there was room in the industry for a more, I think I'll call it professional, institutional fund approach, as opposed to what existed in EB-5 back then. So we got into it in 2010, and since then we have invested in terms of EB-5 capital about $350 million. Most of that was at the $500,000 level, so that represents about 700 families. We've had 100% approval of our projects, and there's two phases. There's the first initial application called an I-526, and that's when you tell immigration, this is what I'm going to do. This is where my money's going to go. This is how I propose that we'll create my 10 jobs. And then the second application is an I-829, and it is the second application after the project is complete. And, we basically prove to USCIS that you did what you said you were going to do. We have 100% approval of all of our I-526s and all of our I-829s. And that, as I mentioned, that's about 700 families and over 2,000 green cards that we've helped our investors obtain.
Okay, thank you. A number of the questions that were brought forward were actually answered privately. I think someone was asking in total, what would be the investment amount as well as the required for 900,000? I don't know if Daniel Gar would like to talk about the total investment amount required in terms of an immigration attorney.
Yeah, I'll take that question. So essentially the principal amount, as we mentioned in the earlier discussion, increased November 2019 from 500,000 to 900,000. And again, it had not been increased at all for nearly 28 years. So that we were expecting that, and it wasn't a surprise. We were a little bit shocked that it was such a big bump, but it is what it is. So the principal amount of the investment is 900,000. Then in addition to that, there will be you, and we will work with you. We can make recommendations, but the applicants, we will make recommendations of some of the top tier immigration attorneys that we work with. They're independent. They don't work for us. They don't work with us. They are independent attorneys that are some of the best in the country. We can give 2 or 3 references, and the folks can contact them, but generally you'll have some legal expenses because they will handle the legal paperwork, and we take care of kind of the financial and the EB-5 aspect. So we will, in addition to the legal expenses, each attorney is a little bit different, but generally, again, each is different, but I would say budget somewhere between $35,000 to $45,000 in legal fees, give or take. Some might be a little less, some might be a little bit more. And then in addition to that, we charge a 1% administrative fee, which is $90,000. That covers our overhead, our expenses to get things moving along and to provide, audited financial reports down the road, third party, quarterly updated reports, and just general overhead. So those are the additional costs. So you should budget 900 plus 90 plus about 40 or so. So a little bit over $1 million is your total investment.
Well, great. When you mentioned million, based on the GBP, it's obviously it's I think about £850,000. So I saw a question in terms of the currency exchange. Obviously, the pound is quite it's okay at the moment. The 900,000. When is that paid to the project?
Sure. Okay. So that's exact. These are the type of logistical questions that's exactly what we want to talk about. So the way it works, any of you folks that are watching this, if you're interested, please contact me, and my email address, again, as Gar mentioned, it's dryan@atlanticamericanpartners.com. And I'll communicate directly with you, and I'll send you all the documentation in a full package. But essentially, in simple terms, you go through a process. The first step, you would complete what we call a suitability questionnaire. And that's a very simple 2-page questionnaire that you'll fill out. And it determines if you're considered a high net worth accredited investor, which at this amount, at 900,000, you're going to have to show proof. The source of funds is, as Gar mentioned, that's the one area that you'd need to be able to document, and this will occur after you hire an immigration attorney. But essentially, this suitability questionnaire you'll fill out, we'll send you all the documents in advance, so you can see, all of the PPM and the LP agreements and everything. But to get started, you complete the suitability questionnaire, we review it, and then we order what's called an Ofac check, which is like an international check, background check. Make sure that you've never been committed what we would call a felony crime or any kind of money laundering, something like that. So once you clear that and you go through all the documentation and you're comfortable and we've answered all your questions and we've given you 2 or 3 attorneys to talk to, and you've selected an attorney that you like, then we start the process. That's when you would sign what's called the subscription agreement, and then you would wire the money to the escrow account, to our escrow account, and at that point we would submit the I-526, which Gar mentioned. That's step 1. So that's essentially the first step of the process. And once the wire is made, we then send to USCIS the I-526 package along with the attorney. It's kind of a concurrently run application process. And at that point, you get a certificate of deposit, which shows that you've invested the money and the process has begun. And again, from this point forward, you should budget or at least estimate, somewhere in the neighborhood of 24 months is a good time period for the I-526 to be reviewed. You know, if there's any questions, if there's any further documentation, they'll ask for it. But as we've mentioned, you know, things have been changing, and we're trying to be realistic. So plan on a 24-month period for that I-526 to go through the process. And at the end of that period, if you've got good source of funds, that's the one thing I would really highlight, folks. You have to be able to document with documentation paperwork, accounts, where the source of funds came from, how did you earn the money, how did you get the $900,000? Was it through income from a job, from a real estate investment, whatever it might be? You're going to have to document that. And once, that's probably the biggest hurdle. And as Gar mentioned, you know, the few folks that have had any challenges along the way, it's always been through this source of funds process. So I would just say, you know, documentation is very important, but subject to approval of source of funds, then it's a pretty smooth process. And within 24 months, most of our clients get approval and get notification to notify us first, and then we notify the client. And you have essentially a kind of a 6-month window to get on a plane, and you'll have a green card waiting for you when you get to the United States.
No problem. Thank you very much, Daniel. Can you touch a bit about the escrow? Because you mentioned about source of funds, you know, about the escrow account, because I think that's important. Or is it just a wire transfer to a wire transfer?
Gar, maybe Gar, you should handle that question.
I'm sorry, I was typing other things. What was the question?
Go ahead, Sam.
It's about the involvement of escrow, or is it just a wire transfer from a bank to another, from a, say for example, British bank?
So the way it works is, you know, the process is, you know, the first thing an investor does is engage a immigration attorney, and they start working on source of funds, and it's more of an art than a science. So they'll look at the investor's balance sheet and determine what the path of least resistance is to getting something approved. And they'll be filling out all the applications. And then the last thing that they need to do to file an application is to have evidence that that money has been placed with us. And so that we'll get a wire transfer into our internal escrow account at our funds. And we'll issue that receipt to the immigration attorney. That completes the source of funds and the path of funds documentation, and the application gets filed. So then the money is sitting in our escrow until, and it's a, you know, it's an escrow account until we get the receipt back from USCIS. When an investor files an application, a receipt, it's called a form I-797. And once we, you know, that'll go to the immigration attorney who'll send it to us. That then is what triggers the money to be released from the escrow account into the fund. Once we know that that application is safely in the queue at USCIS, then it drops to the fund. Investor becomes a limited partner. And then the money drops to the asset at the closing of the bank construction loan, because that's when we fund. We won't fund a project until we know all the sources and uses of capital have been contractually committed to the project. So that's the bank construction loan. We need a commitment from the bank, and the developer's money and our money. And at the closing of the bank construction loan, we would fund, and the developer would fund, and construction would start immediately.
Okay, we had a question. I think it was related to LGBT. I know in the US you have a number of states and different rules. If someone's a gay partner, when they make an application, is that accepted as a partner to be making an application?
I think they have to be contractually wed. I'm not 100% sure. It's a question for an immigration attorney. But I think they have to be married. As long as they're married, then that's recognized by USCIS.
So if there's a marriage certificate documentation supplied by the UK, is that sufficient?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.
Again, to be 100% sure, you probably need to discuss that with an immigration attorney. but I'm about 95% sure, because we've had same-sex couples as investors. So and they've been approved. So I have to think that as long as they're married, I'm 99% sure they're covered.
Excellent. I think a lot of people are considering why they should be looking at the US now. And also, as you know, the UK or London, major cities like the US is very diverse. You don't necessarily have people that are British nationals. They might be, I don't know, a Syrian, an Iranian, or a Russian. Could you guys please explain that in terms of EB5? It's not just for British nationals, it's also for foreign nationals as well.
Well, I'll take that one because I can assure the viewers that the United States is quite diverse. And I personally spent a good part of my time the last few years covering the continent of Africa. As mentioned in the video, I lived in Africa for 10 years. So we have investors from Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya. We've got a lot of interested people from Ghana, some other places. We have investors from all over the world, and from the Middle East to China, Africa, Europe. Here in Tampa, you'd be surprised how many. I mean, I have several neighbors that are folks, they're from London and they live in Tampa and they're happy as can be. And they laugh when I try to use my British accent, and it doesn't come close. But anyhow, seriously, it's a very, America is a lot more diverse than what might be being projected. If you go to most cities around the United States, it's very diverse, and it's becoming more diverse. That's the other thing. The demographics. If you look at America, we're becoming more diverse, and the growth of other types of nationalities is much higher than the Caucasian. So I would say that again, we are at a point where we've gone through some challenging times with the issue of immigration, and I think the country is pulling together, trying to welcome and take a different approach, and much more so. And I think that you're going to see a lot of folks that certainly we've talked to, they're excited to come here.
We've got a question from Stephen. I guess, Stephen, when you're doing a bit of research, you're looking at the different amounts for EB5 in terms of TEA and non-TEA. I know it could be marketed at 900,000 and 1.8. Would Daniel or Gard kind of explain your projects? Are they all in TEA and are they at 900,000? Because obviously they've seen a fluctuation from initially at 500,000 to 900,000 to 1.8.
Correct. Yeah, I'll take that. It's a simple answer. We only do TEA projects and the amount is 900,000. Now you can involve yourself in a direct investment, which is at 1.8 million. We do not do that.
Okay, what can you explain the advantages of a regional center in terms of a direct investment? Because in terms of
so if investing through a regional center allows you to use an econometric model for counting jobs, and if you don't go through a regional center, you have to have W-2s, and all of your employees need to be legal U.S. residents, and so it's a lot easier to use an econometric model and regional center. And let me talk a little bit about job creation, Sam, if I can, because I've gotten a couple of questions on that. Okay. So the way it works is USCIS gives us an econometric model to use, and it's an input-output model. There are two inputs, and the output is a job number. The first input is a construction expenditure. And I think maybe I've already mentioned this, but for every $1 million of construction, you get about 10 jobs. And then for every $1 million of revenue, you get an output number of jobs, depending on what kind of industry it is. And you add those two numbers together, and that's your expected job number. As I mentioned earlier, we want to make sure that we meet the job creation requirement just from the construction. It's a much safer approach. But if you don't use a regional center, then you've got to provide documentation on the employees that you are employing and managing.
So just to recap, because we know, Gar and Daniel, it's really difficult in this time to make sure that jobs are secure, sustaining those jobs, because there's so much overheads and so much costs that are involved in running a business in the UK. And if you think about replicating that into a new territory, that's very risky in that itself. So hence why sometimes people want to choose a regional center, because that regional center, I guess, that's where the admin fee comes in. That's where they deal with all that on a day-to-day basis. So taking that huge headache from legals, from job credit, from taxations, from, you know, employment law, all those elements are taken away. I know a lot of people have been asking in terms of, you know, in terms of source of funds again, is that source of funds purely coming from the applicant, or can that be a gift from friends and family?
I'll take that. The answer is it can be a gift. If an applicant has a family or friend member that does want to provide a gift, and again, as long as the gift is, you know, documented and it can be tracked, that is allowable. It happens. So that is a way of, you know, some people, in certain cases, maybe the applicant has, you know, 500,000 and their grandparent has the 400,000 and they gift it. You know, many times it might be kind of a gift as part of the inheritance, for example. So the answer is yes.
Excellent. We have a question from, how long does it take for the actual process, you know, from an inquiry to supplying documentation? What, I know you've given us a time frame for actually getting the conditional green card, but what is the actual process in terms of getting all the documentations done? What have you seen, Daniel, and what have you seen?
Yeah. Okay, I'll speak and then Gar can add to it. But I think part of your question is the initial documentation process. You know, to get to a submittal, it's really dependent upon the applicant's organization. You know, their paperwork, the coordination that they have with us, with providing the attorney, the source of funds documentation. Some people are very organized and they can submit documentation, and, you know, a week later they have a package to the attorney. Some folks, you know, they're not as organized, and, you know, they might need to retract bank accounts or, you know, transfer real estate properties. So it depends on how organized the applicant is. But once the applicant submits all that information to us and to the attorney, our turnaround time is pretty quick. You know, once we have all the documents signed and source of funds are approved, you know, the I-526 can be submitted within a week or two. It can be submitted sometimes less than that. You know, so let's talk about, let's just kind of walk folks through so we're real clear. So you have a completed I-526 application. You've hired an attorney. You've signed the documents for us. We have a package. The wire is sent, 900,000, 90,000 administrative fee. You've hired the attorney. We then send the package to USCIS with the receipt. You get the receipt. From that point to getting the temporary green card, which is the I-526, is roughly 24 months. Okay. So the preparation time, plan on 30 days to get all your paperwork organized to the submittal. So 30 days plus 2 years to get a temporary green card is a pretty good estimate. Now, upon getting your temporary green card, that does give you and your family, your wife, husband, and children under 21, make sure we're clear, under 21, and you can have as many children as you have come with you. So it's a package deal. So at the end of that 2-year period, roughly, we'll receive notification. At that point, you will actually have the ability to come fly to the United States and bring your goods and start living in the States. So once you're here, then we go through, roughly it's about a 3 to 4 year period to get to that second stage, which is the I-829, which is the permanent green card. So to answer the question as clearly as possible, folks, you should plan on from start to permanent green card, 5 to 6 years is a good estimate. Sometimes less. In certain cases, generally it's about 5 to 6 years, unless something unusual in your application is dragging the process down. And that would happen mostly in the source of funds process early on in the stage.
I think also we've got another question in terms of if, how long do they have to be, if they start their application on an EB5, how long do they have to be in the US? And if they're a business person going back and forth from the US to the UK, is there a time frame that they have to be in the US? In like 365 days, how many days are they allowed out of the country?
Yeah, Gar, do you want to handle that?
Thanks,
On
Dan.
the memo sends.
I'm sorry, I was on another phone
You-
call. I apologize. I've got a hectic morning. What was the question?
The question was, out of 365 days, what's the minimum time period a new temporary green card holder needs to live and stay in the US?
The general assumption, there are always, sort of other circumstances, but the general, rule of thumb is, 183 days a year. So half plus one.
Okay, is that in per year in that 5 years? Can they do that consecutively, or is that just every year on it? How's that structured?
Again, that's a question for an immigration attorney. We're more the investment guys, but I've heard the questions and answers before, and any immigration attorney, they all give you a little bit of a different answer. But USCIS wants to see an intent to immigrate, and they generally view that as you got to spend at least half your time here, and they recommend on a calendar basis, spend half plus a day in the United States.
Yeah, so basically a good rule of thumb, at least 6 months or more in the States is, and again, every immigration attorney will give you a little bit of an adjusted answer, but I would say for folks that are watching, plan on at least half the year being here plus a day or two is a good rule of thumb. So you could be half here and half in the UK.
Okay, I know it's 4:45, so a lot of people are obviously want to leave the office, and we've answered a number of questions. And if we haven't, apologies, a member of Atlantic American team will be in touch. Daniel and God, do you have any final remarks? Anything you'd like to add to this webinar?
Well, I'll just start by thanking the viewers. Thank you for taking the time. We appreciate it. We would be more than happy to answer further detailed questions. You've got our contact information. We're very much excited about working with folks in the UK. And as I mentioned, we have an office in London under CEA Worldwide. So once the travel ban is lifted, I will personally be coming to the UK, hopefully as soon as possible. And I wish all of you safety, and hope that you get vaccinated as soon as possible. And I wish you a good day.
Thank you very much, Daniel. Would you like to make any final comments because you've been able to keep them?
Yeah.
Right. Yes.
Yeah. Sam, thank you for hosting us this evening, and appreciate everybody's time participating with us. And it's immigrating to another country is a very big step. And so it needs to be well thought out. You need to do tax planning before you relocate. First step would be engaging an immigration attorney, and if you don't have an immigration attorney in the U.S. that you've been talking to, Dan and I can provide some references. We work with some very good immigration attorneys, and and it's a process, and we're here to be more than just an investment means to an end. We're here to help you throughout that whole process. Dan and I have made a lot of friends over the course of our careers in EB5. It is a good process. It does require some hand holding, and And it's in my perspective, I've done a lot of institutional investing over my 35 years of investing. EB5 is absolutely the best. It's the most rewarding because you're really helping somebody change their lives, and hopefully we can be here to assist you guys should you decide to go down that route. And again, thanks for taking the time tonight.
Well, thank you very much, Gar and Daniel. Of course, you know, you guys are, you know, expanding into the UK. We're based in the UK. Once the restrictions are lifted, we're going to, I hope to see you more in the UK, because there's going to be a lot of questions that are going to be needed to be answered while we have these restrictions. You know, a lot of people probably want to see your projects. You know, will you guys be doing live video feeds? Because of course, a lot of people have joined us through Facebook Live. You know, what are you doing in terms of showcasing some of these investors that want to see the projects if they can't travel? Gar and Daniel, what would you do?
You know, that's a great question. You know, we have not as of yet really had a live video feed where we have shown. That's why we're trying to give video. What we did today earlier was to show our viewers exactly what we have going on right now. But you know, it's something I'm sure, you know, we're looking at creative ways to bring viewers that can't travel. You know, that's certainly something we should look at. And you know, we might one of these, you know, talk about having where we actually go to a site and we can have a live feed, and we can, you know, for example, you know, we started the swamp, the student housing at the University of Florida. What we might do, and perhaps we can put it on our schedule, is to actually go up there and do a live feed and show once some construction activity really kicks in, we can actually show progress. You know, because you know, there's just you know, as a comment, not to drag it on too long, but you know, that's the problem with COVID and Zoom. You know, it's great to have the Zoom calls, and it really does help. But you know, Gar and I, we've traveled a lot together, and there's nothing quite like face-to-face communication and eyeball to eyeball. Have a meal, sit down, go see the site. We love it. That's the best part of the job. Is we can't wait for you folks to come to Tampa. You know, we'll help make arrangements for you, and you know, it's a great area to start your visit. We can show you properties we've developed or we have invested in with developers, and we can, you know, give you a personal tour of some of our projects. But the reality is, until you can travel, we can't do that. So, you know, I think that's a good idea. We'll have to have a discussion about how we could potentially do something like that.
So viewers, if you're listening, you get to invest, you get to go to Florida, you get to enjoy the lifestyle. What more can you ask? We just want more vaccines, you know, being comfortable in terms of traveling. And, you know, please, Atlantic American Group are here to make sure that you live the American dream. They're going to be answering more questions. This is first, you know, a webinar of many webinars that we intend to roll out throughout the UK. You have Daniel Ryan's details as well as Gar's. Please, you know, if you have further questions that you don't want to put across during this webinar, please just, you know, send them a message directly. Gar, Daniel, thank you so much. You guys have been amazing. And, you know, we can't wait to have you come across the pond, come to our island, and of course, engage with the investors directly. Thank you so much, Gar. Thank you, Daniel. And if anyone's joined the webinar late, it will be available on demand, and we will be sending you the video of the webinar. And if there's any additional elements that we haven't been able to cover during the Q&A session, apologies, because there are a few questions that popped up. We couldn't answer that directly, but we will answer them individually. So Daniel, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Gar. Wishing you all the best. And guys, you know, if you're working from home, enjoy the rest of the evening, or if you're traveling or commuting back, safe travels.